Learning professionals often focus on content, tools, and technology. But great learning experiences are built on something deeper: understanding of how people think, process information, and engage with the world around them. In this episode of Modern Learning on the Air, Connie Malamed joins us to explore the evolving role of instructional design, the often overlooked power of visual communication, and the capabilities learning professionals need as AI changes the production side of our work. Whether you're a facilitator, a designer, a consultant, or a learning leader, this conversation offers a thoughtful look at what matters most. Connie, thanks so much for joining us.
I'm happy to do it, David.
Tell us a little bit about what you do.
Okay. For a very long time, I consulted with organizations to help them build essentially learning products. Now I write for the eLearning Coach site and publish a podcast for that site. And my main focus has been on a membership community I have called Mastering Instructional Design, where we have learning events. I help people with their careers, and I just try to help people learn and build instructional design skills.
And you mentioned the e-learning coach. You've been doing that for a while. And it's been something that's always been a great resource for me, and I know for others in the industry. But in the time that you've been doing it, when you look back at all the years that you've been writing and contributing to the field, what are some of the things that have changed about the work that learning professionals do?
Mhm.
And maybe on the flip side, what are some of the things that might have been stubbornly the same in your time in the field?
I think a lot of people who've been in the field for a long time will agree that at one time we thought of ourselves as content developers, and that was fun. You got to write, you got to create interactions, and you got to create 8-hour e-learning courses.
We did.
We did. And now there's a big focus on supporting workers and building capabilities for them to be able to do their jobs. So the whole idea of content has changed to essentially building capabilities, getting people what they need quickly, and if forever, never building an 8-hour e-learning course.
Yeah. So let's dig into a little bit what that looks like, the whole craft of learning design. When someone says they want to become an instructional designer today, and I know you do a lot of work supporting people in this space, what do you
Mhm.
wish they understood before they started jumping right into a tool like Storyline, Canva, or even an AI tool these days?
I'm pretty sure that a lot of people equate instructional design with e-learning. That's
Mhm.
somehow gotten out there. And one of the first things I teach them is it's really about how people learn and what they need in workplace training to support their performance on the job. So whatever that takes and whatever form it will be in, we have to think about their environment, the audience. So our one solution will not be the same for across all organizations and even problems that we're trying to solve.
And I think in practice, what I've noticed, at least, maybe you know something differently, is that over the years, instructional design. You and I have been in the field for a while. I don't like to put a number on it anymore. But being in this field for a while, instructional design used to literally mean that. It used to just mean like we were designing instructions, and somewhere along the line, the instructional developer role became just part of the instructional designer's role, broadly speaking, at least. And I think that that contributes to why a lot of instructional designers describe their role through the lens of a tool.
Hmm.
What are some of the things that people should be doing before they even think about a tool from an instructional design standpoint?
I like to think in terms of mixing user experience design processes with instructional design. So, if someone is thinking about using an ADDIE model, what's missing is, in the original analysis, is looking at the environment where people work,
Hmm.
looking at the workflow, looking at the emotional and social aspects of what they're doing and what they'll be learning and how they can get help. All of those things, really understanding the audience, all of those things come first. And of course, understanding how people learn or what they need to support their performance, really comes first before we even think about getting into instructional design. And one of the big problems is that the way workplaces are set up, is that if people have a problem, if a manager or a higher up notices a problem, they come to the L&D team or individual and say, I need a course on this. And that's what we consider order taking. And what
Hmm.
we're trying to do to change the profession is to really get down to the root cause of the problem. So often, a course is not going to solve the problem. And when it doesn't, then you're the failure. So, and not only that, I mean, of course, it's a waste of time and effort and energy to develop and design anything, even a support system, if that's not the problem. So, looking at the root cause is one of the key things we have to try to do. And it's not always easy, especially for a new person. If
Yeah.
someone comes to them and says, build this course, is it someone who's new at the job really going to say, well, are you sure? Let's do a root cause analysis and really try to figure this out. So a lot of times people are stuck between a rock and a hard place.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's something that is a little different about the role the field as well. I mean, I think about how how the field has evolved over the years. One of the things that you mentioned there is representative of that. Like for me, I remember a point where the instruction when I was managing a team when I was in a bank many hair colors ago. The I had an instructional designer and they didn't always talk to the client. They usually got the brief because that's what their role was. But now the instructional designers are talking to the SMEs themselves. They they have to have that consulting skills. What are some of the other ways that the instructional design role has evolved and expanded over the years that you think are meaningful?
Well, I do think I'm glad you mentioned consulting because I think that's a really important skill. We have to learn how to listen, how to disagree diplomatically, make sure people understand that we're on the same team and we're on the same side. What we're looking for is improvement and building capabilities. Some other ways that it's changed is that people often need to know more about data and measurement and finding metrics within an organization that they can use to prove or disprove that whatever system or courses they create are actually making change. Of course, the technology keeps changing, but it's kind of funny that it almost always comes down to no matter what technology you're using, do you have the knowledge so that you can provide evaluation and judgment about what you're going to be building and what you have built and being able to say no, being able to say, well, I don't think that's the real problem. Let's take a look at it.
The proper way to say no could be a podcast in and of itself, I think, because that's a big issue. Well, and there's a lot to it, as we've been describing, in terms of how much instructional design has expanded. But I don't want to skip over the design piece itself, because I think sometimes some of the challenges that we have in instructional design are in the design element itself. So when we come back, we're going to explore the parts of the learning design that often get overlooked until we recognize that it's being done poorly. Visual communication. Let's talk about that when we come back. So stay with us.
You've got the knowledge, the expertise, but turning that into effective, engaging training, that's another skill entirely. At InSync Training, we take your content and transform it into learner-focused, interactive, and results-driven programs without the guesswork. Our instructional designers are experts in structuring training that's clear and engaging, designing interactive virtual, hybrid, and blended learning experiences, and developing training that sticks. So your employees don't just learn, they apply. Stop struggling with training that misses the mark. Let's design something that works. Schedule a consultation today.
Welcome back. Connie, you've spent years helping people understand that visual design is much more than going into a tool and making slides look attractive. Why is visual design such an important part of learning?
I think it comes back to dual coding theory from Alan Pavio, which is widely accepted. I'm not saying it's 100% accepted and it's debated, but dual coding theory states that people have two channels for processing information. And this is, probably a simplified version. One is nonverbal, meaning images, and the other is verbal, meaning words. The two systems do interact, but by having visuals, relevant visuals that improve learning, that make sense and are meaningful, gives humans a second track for representing knowledge, storing information. So when you have two systems, if you're looking for, let's say you want to retrieve some information, you have two tracks. You can look for the visual in memory, you can look for the words in memory. Of course, this is all happening in nanoseconds, so
Hmm.
we're not even aware of it, but it does give us two different forms of information to process, actually to perceive, process, understand, and retrieve. How's that for a short answer?
That's a very good short answer, and not research based at all. So, question. So, what is this? Let's bring it down from the academic definition of what this looks like in practice. So,
Good.
when you have core design and learning, what does it look like? Like, how does it interfere with the learning? Even if the content is great, if it's poor design, what does it look like, and how does it interfere with the learning?
So a good design is going, or let's say an effective design, so it
Yep.
doesn't sound super subjective.
Hmm.
An effective design is going to be one that has a visual hierarchy. In other words, we're cueing and signaling to the learner what to look at first, second, and third, but first is the most important. It's going to have as little distractions as possible, which means it's probably not going to be cluttered. And it's going to support learning because every visual you use is relevant. Although, on the other hand, just to make things more complicated, a lightly decorative visual can be motivating, according to my theory, if it doesn't interfere with learning. So I might, rather than have, let's say, an e-learning or a presentation, rather than just have a screen full of text, I might put in a decorative image, but it's very subtle. And it's going to fade a bit to the background, but it's more aesthetically pleasing. So we do have to think about that. But I don't want to put in a plug for decorative images. Mostly we're concerned with relevant visuals. So here's a great example.
Hmm.
You've got a concept that you're trying to explain that's really abstract and complex. If you can think of a visual metaphor or a way to diagram it, let's say a process, it's going to make it more concrete so that people can understand what you're talking about. That's a good example.
So we tend to be thinking about instructional design and talking about it as an industry. When we think about instructional design, sometimes we have the blinders on of a self-paced e-learning course that instructional designers build things that an individual is going to engage in themselves. But the design is actually much larger than that in terms of the world of learning. Sometimes we're designing things that are going to be facilitated live. I mean, think about it like a conference session or a virtual session. We build visuals, but they're going to be supporting a facilitator who's going to be leading a discussion live. Have you ever been participating in a live experience where you've been watching this and immediately looked at it and said the designer built content that was not considered for how it's going to work in a live facilitation?
Sure, of course. First of all, I mean, I think a rule of thumb is to always pilot test anything that's going to be facilitated, watch it in front of a small group of people, take notes, find out what works and what doesn't. So that's just zero. I mean, you just have to do that. But the other thing is, I think a lot of times people will overload the facilitator with too much information, the wrong information, or actually provide a facilitator guide that isn't easy to scan and use. And I think that's really important too. So you can tell when the flow isn't there.
So, what does that relationship look like? Because I've noticed over the years that instructional designers and facilitators, they don't experience a program the same way. Like designers make the decisions around what the slides should look like and what the visuals should look like, but the facilitators live with those decisions in real time and they have to work with them. How do you think about the relationship between the design and the delivery of a program?
I think it has to be, if it really is two separate people, then it has to be collaborative, where in addition to even before you go and pilot test it, I think the designer has to work with the facilitator and find out, could this work? Could that work? And you really can put in, little decision guides so that if
Hmm.
something isn't working, the facilitator has a few options. If a conversation falls flat, if no one's responding, if no one's engaged, try this. If a breakout session runs short, try this. So there are ways that you can put in decision points to help the facilitator, but it has to be collaborative.
And I loved your example earlier around testing some of these things and live testing it, because some of the organizations that we've always worked with over the years, you have to scale these things. And you're going to get this, you want to make sure that the facilitator guide is complete, that you can get to someone who maybe wasn't part of that collaborative pattern, but it reflects that collaborative design because it's been in there. And I love that example there. So thank you for sharing that.
Yeah.
You mentioned, I want to close this section by circling back to something you said earlier. You talked a lot about the cognitive load and what positive learning design. And when we think about cognitive load, we tend to zero in on the learner, which is obviously important. I don't mean to minimize that in any way, but we tend to narrow that discussion on there. But it's not just the learner who can deal with cognitive load. It could also be the facilitator. So how,
Right.
when you design, do you think about the cognitive load that is applied to the facilitators, and how do you support that?
So let's define cognitive load as the mental resources that a person has to be able to complete a task.
Hmm.
So you're always going to have some cognitive load because we're thinking, we're processing. But what we want to avoid is high cognitive load because then people get overwhelmed and they can't do their jobs as a facilitator. So one interesting approach, since we were just talking about visual design, is the visual design of a facilitator guide should use the same principles that you would use for slides or e-learning, meaning you should have a visual hierarchy that clearly shows, let's say, each section.
Hmm.
Everything should be repeated in terms of the structure. All of those things, it should have the time in it. All of these things can help the facilitator manage their own cognitive load. Like I was mentioning earlier, little decision guides, like a small matrix. Do this if this happens, do this if that happens. Very clear activity instructions, not crowding the slides with too much to do, but with just enough information for participants to be able to complete an activity. There's so many things that we can do at the design stage to reduce cognitive load so the facilitator always knows the purpose and what they're supposed to do next.
And those are really great tips that can help us make our live experiences more effective. So thanks for sharing them and everything that you shared so far. For our last segment, I want to shift gears a little bit. Up until this point, we've been talking about the great tips that you're sharing about how to create a better learning experience. But on our final segment, I would like to shift gears and talk about our focus on the people who actually create them. And that's what we're going to talk about in our final segment. So stay with us.
A virtual session can go wrong in seconds. Tech issues, awkward silences, distracted learners, it all adds up to a training disaster. But at InSync Training, our expert virtual producers don't just keep things running, they elevate your sessions. We handle the tech, troubleshoot issues, and keep things on track. We support facilitators so they can focus on delivering great content. We manage breakout rooms, live polls, and interactions seamlessly. If training is critical to your business, production should be too. So let's talk. Schedule a free consultation today.
Welcome back. In our final segment, we're going to talk about the people who are actually doing the design themselves. Not the design that they're doing, but the individuals themselves. I want to talk a little bit about professional growth, visibility, and the future of our profession. Now, Connie, one of the things that you've been working on lately that I've been enjoying watching everything you're sharing on LinkedIn is around professional visibility and how to
Mm.
increase your professional visibility as a learning professional in our field. What drew you to that topic?
Basically, the thing that drew me to the topic is that I've had the Mastering Instructional Design community since 2019. And there are new and inexperienced people there, but there are some very, very experienced people in the community or have been through, they spent some time there. And one thing I noticed is that many people working in L&D are turned off by self-promotion on the
Hmm.
one hand. But on the other hand, they're really giving good people who love to help and are very experienced, creative, and super intelligent. I just love the people in the field. But often those experienced people aren't putting themselves out there to get the opportunities that they would like to get. So I started thinking in terms of visibility, researching, as you can imagine,
Mhm.
all the things that are behind it, credibility, reputation, image, all of that. And I realized that one of the best ways that people can promote themselves is to not promote themselves, is to just help others. And that comes naturally to the profession. So just thinking about all of that made me create a course, for a free course. I can give you the link to put in the show notes.
Please.
And, and really, it was all based on my experience, because when I got into the field, the last thing I wanted to do was to be in front of people. I was kind of just introverted. I'm not really introverted. I just wanted to work on the computer. That's all. Wanted to create content. So but after I wrote a book, I went to Toastmasters for a year. I got more comfortable speaking in public. Now I love it. I mean, I think it's just great interacting with an audience. And I just wanted to help other people who feel the same way that I do to be able to put themselves out there in a positive, helping, way by contributing meaningfully to the field. And you don't have to, really do a whole lot of self promotion to get out there.
I love the example of looking at it through the lens of service and help. I mean, that's what's worked for me as well. And you tend to think of it as you see these people at a conference and these thought leaders, and they have this image and this reputation, but it's really all about helping people. And I love that. That's one of the
Really is.
misconceptions people have, that you need to have been an author. You need to be these things. What are some of the other things, as you've put this course together, you've done your research, that you think people misunderstand about visibility?
Well, I do think that that's number one, just that you can help, and that gives you visibility. I think people don't realize how much nowadays, if you're looking for work, how much they immediately go to the hiring managers or recruiters, immediately go online to look up your reputation. And if you're not visible online, I think, I haven't done any research on this, but I'm guessing that that's not as good as being extremely visible in in a helping kind of way. Another thing is, a lot of people have imposter syndrome. Many people have it who are very well known, and I think people don't realize how extremely common it is.
Yeah.
And one approach to all of these psychological barriers that people have is to look at it. I heard someone say this, well, it was for women. It said, look at it like a mean girl in your head, just jabbering away, or for a guy, a mean guy. And
Mhm.
you just have to learn to ignore that voice. So I think people don't realize that there is a way to get over it without 10 years of therapy, although that might help too. I'm not sure.
Absolutely. Well, what kind of we've reached the point of the conversation. This has been we can't avoid it anymore. It's a requirement of every conversation that we have, that we talk about the future, and can't talk about the future without mentioning AI. I think this is the longest conversation I've had in the industry in months before we've gotten to this topic. But we're going to have to talk about the buzzword. So you're in this field. You've been doing this for a while. There's a lot of people who are concerned, watching and wondering how AI is going to affect it. And most people, we see a lot of the AI usage today. It's in the lowest hanging fruit around producing content.
Hmm.
If AI is increasingly being used to create valuable content, where do the human capabilities become more important? Where does the human element reside in a world where AI can produce viable content?
Well, I think one important aspect of it is that we will need to, if AI is doing a lot of the production work, then, and perhaps the analysis, it's going to be up to us to have discernment, be
Mhm.
able to evaluate and judge. So therefore, in some ways, your instructional design skills are more important than ever, because if you're asking AI to write an assessment for you, it may not be thinking about cognitive load. It may not be thinking about matching the objectives. It may not know that some of the responses are not plausible. So it's really up to the learning designer to use all of that knowledge to be able to judge and evaluate whether AI is doing the right work. There is always the human component. I don't think, like, even though for some reason years ago I chose the e-learning coach as the title of my website, which of course I'm sorry about now, I almost never think that you don't, or let me put it in a positive way. I think you almost always need to supplement that with human connection, with
Mhm.
human conversation. We learn so much from discussions. ATD just had the ICE
Mhm.
conference, which I didn't attend, but I enjoyed reading people's summaries, and everyone said what the best part was were the conversations in the hallway.
Yeah.
And I have always felt the same way.
Yep.
So we learned so much from our conversations, from small discussion groups. Mm. So that's an important part that, humans can add to it. In terms of only using AI for production, I think it's important to also think in terms of using AI for learner facing products or tools. So that would be AI assisted coaches, AI in the workflow to help
Mhm.
people know what to do next, AI tutors. So I think we should start thinking about learner facing tools that can help people perform better within their workflow.
So just listening to you there, it echoes the conversation that I have with a lot of people in our field right now, in the sense of what we've done in the past, it's going to look different in some ways in the future. How I as an instructional designer have spent my day in my career up until this point, it's probably going to look somewhat different in the future. And what's challenging for people is what that future is still being defined. It's a very gray vision of what that looks like. But in your
Mhm.
opinion, what skills should learning professionals be investing in over the next few years to kind of be part of this evolution?
hmm I think it depends on where you lie. For example, I know they need people in governance and policy. So if someone is a big picture person, then I would develop the skills to help workplaces understand what's an ethical use of AI, a secure use of AI. That's for the big picture people. For people who love working with the details, I think, as Josh Cavalier says, and other people, you're going to be orchestrating
Hmm.
different agents to be able to do the job. Again, your knowledge, your discernment will be a big part of that. So you may have to get used to the idea that perhaps you won't be producing as much as possible. And then also just learning how to design maybe custom GPTs, some things that will help in terms of AI tutors and coaches. But also, I think it's important to always mention, let's say if someone's in a job interview, which I always think about that for my people, I think it's important to mention that always stick to policies. You care about security. You never upload things that without permission, and that you believe in the ethical use of AI, so that they know that you do stick to policies and guidelines. I think it's always good to add that in there.
Yeah. Kind of one of the things I've always appreciated in working with you over the years is the informed approach that you have to stuff, and how much you've helped people. You model what you talked about earlier about coming to the table to help people. You bring your visibility, and it serves you as well as them. You've spent years studying this, around how people learn, sharing that with the community, and now even expanding that to how learning professionals can grow in their visibility in their careers. When you think about where we are today, where we're going, what gives you the most optimism when you think about the future of L&D?
I just think it's a wonderful, intelligent group of people, and whatever adaptions and changes we need to make to our careers, that we will be able to do it. This is a very rough, challenging time for a lot of people. People are having trouble finding work. They're scared about AI.
Hmm.
So there are a lot of challenges, but I do think we're innovative and flexible enough to overcome those as a community, and keep shining. And, hopefully someday we'll all have a seat at the table and organizations will really appreciate us.
Excellent. Just one last closing question. I could be talking to you all day. I always enjoy talking with you, but just to close on a very practical note, what's a piece of advice that you would give someone new to the field, coming
Mhm.
in for the first time? We're in a period of flux right now. Someone coming in right now, what's a piece of advice that you would give them as they enter the field?
I always tell people before you do anything, understand how people learn because everything is based on that. How you can support people, enable people, and teach people in a way that's based on evidence and research. That comes, in my mind, that comes before anything else.
I appreciate that. And one of the things I will add to what you shared is
Okay.
for a lot of people, the idea of having research informed practice is overwhelming. They don't have the time to do the research. And one of the things I've always appreciated about you is that you do that work for the field. You do the research and you apply how that applies in practice so that people can take that in a practical way. So I thank you for being someone who does that for our industry.
You're welcome. And there's so many other people who do too. Quickly coming to mind,
Yeah.
Julie Dirk does it, Clark Quinn does it. There's just a whole group of people who are really into interpreting cognitive science, for our everyday lives.
Connie, you've given us a lot to think about in the podcast. I really appreciate it from the points around why instructional design matters, why visual design matters, all the points about cognitive load. I especially love the work that you're doing and what you shared today around professional visibility. But most importantly, I think I love the fact that you touched on no matter where the technology goes, it's the human element that is ultimately going to shape the future of our work. I appreciate you taking the time to chat with me here today and share this with all of our listeners.
David, it's always great to speak with you.
You as well. And to our listeners, if you'd like to learn more about Connie's work, be sure to visit the eLearning Coach website, which will be in our show notes, and explore all of her books, podcasts, and resources. She contributes a tremendous amount to our field, a lot of great value there. Check all of that in the show notes. And if you've enjoyed today's conversation, be sure to subscribe to Modern Learning on the Air for more discussions at the intersection of learning, leadership, and performance. Thanks so much for listening, and we'll see you next time.
Thank you for tuning into Modern Learning on the Air. For all your training and services needs, visit us at insynctraining.com. And don't forget to sign up for our monthly webinars, where we cover key topics and trends in the learning and development space. Until next time, keep learning and keep growing.